There we go. This morning I'm going to talk about hope. I'm going to talk about hope. It's a very important thing to have. And oftentimes when we talk about the word hope, we use the word hope incorrectly, so I'm hoping to kind of clear that up a little bit, huh? Anyway. By the way, in case you didn't know, last year was the beginning of the Advent season, which means that last year was the New Year. Because in the church, the New Year begins at Advent. So last year was the beginning of Advent. If you take a look, we have our Advent wreath down there, and you'll see the little blue candles and the little rose candles down there. Roger's been arguing that those are actually purple candles, but Roger's colorblind. It's not my fault. Last week, too, we had some folks who told us, they said, well, you didn't light all the candles. You forgot to light all the candles. But last week, being the first week of Advent, you only light one candle. This week, it's the second week of Advent, so we light two candles. And eventually, we'll get them all lit, and then finally, it'll be Christmas Day. It's a way to count down to Christmas Day. I want to talk about Advent being a season of hope, because the church sets aside the 4 weeks before Christmas to help us sort of realign ourselves with the biblical story of Jesus. And we're moving into this season, this 4 weeks of anticipation, these 4 weeks of this anticipation of the hope to come, about the promised Messiah to come. We're aligning ourselves with the children of Israel as they hoped for and they anticipated the Messiah to come. And even though the Messiah has now come, we are still in a season of anticipation because now we are anticipating and we have hope in his return as he comes back to get us all. So we're in the season of hope. It's to remind us of what they were feeling at that time. A lot of the symbols that we have sort of fallen by the wayside. In the past, if you went back to, say, medieval times, we had a lot more symbols that people understood. Now a lot of them we just sort of don't get. And it's because of the big change in the one invention. One invention caused this big change, the Gutenberg press. In the old days, there may only be one Bible in an entire village or town or city. And so you had to listen to it being read once a week, and that's all you got. But the rest of the time it was filled in by the symbols that surrounded the town, like in the architecture of the church. Many of the medieval churches were laid out in a cross pattern to tell you about the cross of Jesus. You could look at the stained glass windows and see the story of Jesus represented there in the very carvings and figures and artwork. And in the liturgical calendar, you would start with Advent, with everybody anticipating the birth of the King to come. And then it would move on into Christmas time, and then you keep going on into normal time, and eventually you'd come to the season of Lent as you prepared yourself for Easter. And then, of course, there would be Easter, and then back to normal time. Okay? But all throughout the year, because you didn't have a Bible in your hands to keep you refreshed about the story of Jesus, it was put into the feasts and the celebrations all throughout the year. So we're going to talk a little bit about Advent and the Advent wreath. Advent is the beginning of the liturgical years. It's 4 Sundays before Christmas. It's a season of expectation. It's a reminder of Israel's expectation of the coming Messiah. And the focus for us now is the return of the Messiah. How many people are anticipating that? How many people are hoping for that? Yeah. We also have the Advent wreath. It's a new addition. It came from Germany, where many of our Christmas traditions come from. If you wonder where a lot of our American traditions come from, they're not American, they're German. Okay? But they came from Germany in the 1500s. And the modern Advent wreath, like the one down there, took its shape in the 1800s. Johann Heinrich Weichern, working in the mission house, which was a house for orphan children where they would go and they would learn and they would be taught. The children would ask him every day if Christmas had arrived, because you have to remember, they didn't have printed calendars like we have, right? Nowadays we have our little printed cat calendars and our little printed Barbie calendars, and we got every type of calendar you can imagine. They didn't have those, and so the kids were always asking, is today Christmas? Is today Christmas? Apparently they were in expectation of Christmas. So he developed what he had Advent wreath. He'd made it out of an old will, and it actually had 20 red candles and 4 white candles, equaling 24 candles, and he would light one every day for them so they would know on the countdown how close they were getting to Christmas. So a red candle was lit every day and a white one every Sunday so they could begin to move it down. And that was the way that he helped them count it down. That's kind of the beginning of our modern Advent wreath. What do the colors mean? Well, it depends where you're at. In the Catholic Church, you'll notice that they use purple candles and a pink candle. And the reason why is because during this season, the priest in their liturgical garments will wear purple. It's a season of penance. It's a season to bring yourself back to thinking about your own sins and the expectation of the Messiah who will come to rescue the sins. In the Protestant churches, which we are one, we use blue candles because blue is the color of hope. And then finally, the rose candle. You light the rose candle on the third week because that tells you that the wait is almost over. You're almost there. It's a little minor celebration. It's a little bit about rejoicing. Wait a minute, how come I see Advent wreaths with 4 red candles? What's that all about? Well, most Protestant churches don't have priest investments, right? The closest I get to wearing my priestly vestments is when I put on a tie. So there you go. Okay. So the red, since that's the traditional color of Christmas, they usually just use 4 red candles. It's nothing too particularly spectacular. And then you're going to say, well, wait a minute, how come I see an extra white candle in some of these wreaths? What's that all about? And the extra white candle is actually lit on Christmas Day. That's why that one's there. Okay, and it's known as the Christmas candle. So since if we were going to be here Christmas Sunday, if there was a Christmas Sunday, we'd have a white candle there to light, but we're not going to be here, and I'm not driving all the way down here to light it. So there's no white candle in our wreath, but that's what it is. We have 3 blue candles to represent the hope that we have, and the rose candle is for the we're almost there, we're almost there. Advent is a season of anticipation and hope. And I want to kind of get us into a little bit of a hopeful mood, because hope is something that we must have. Without hope, we'd probably all die. So let's take a look at that. Faith, hope, and love. I like to call those sort of like the, they're almost like 3 sisters in a sense. Faith being the older sister and love being the youngest one. And hope, unfortunately, is sort of like the middle sister who gets ignored. We don't talk about hope very often. We talk about faith, we talk about hope, we talk about love. It comes from the 13th chapter of Corinthians, where Paul talks about all the gifts. Okay, and he gets to the very end and he says, only these 3 will remain, right? Faith, hope, and love. And of course, the greatest is, that's why I always think of love as the youngest child, because we all know the youngest child is the greatest child, right? It's like the parents went, oh, that's the right one. We don't have to have any more, right? And, and faith, of course, is like the oldest child because they're so faithful and they do everything they're supposed to and they're so responsible and everything seems to start with, right? But poor hope, we don't talk about that very, very much. Like the poor middle child is like, oh, hope, But we're going to talk about hope and what it is. We use the word incorrectly. Hope in modern times has become sort of a synonym for the word want. Let me give you a great example of this. Right now it's final exam week at the college, and I'm giving out final exams, and I can't tell you how many times I hear the students say, I hope I get an A on this exam. What do they really mean? I want to get an A on this exam. Okay? Or they'll say, I hope I pass this class. What do they really mean? I want to pass this class. Because for many of these students, there's not a hope in the world they're going to get an A or pass that class. I'm just like going, you can hope all you want, but it's just a want. It's not a hope. There is no hope for you in this one. It's all over. What is hope really? What does it mean? Hope is definitely not the same thing as just optimism. Oh, I hope, I hope, I hope. It's not just optimism. Okay? It is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty, and that's an important part of hope, the certainty that something makes sense regardless of how it turns out. There's a certainty to hope. By the way, that's a quote from Václav Havel. If you don't know who he is, he's the former president of Czechoslovakia, the first democratically elected president of Czechoslovakia. So it's a certainty. There's a certainty behind it. Optimism, there's a wanting things to turn out okay, but you're not certain about it. Hope is a confident expectation based on the character of a person or thing. Hope is a confident expectation based upon the character of a person or thing. And probably the best example I can give you of this, of having absolute confident expectation based upon the character of something, is the anchor. Now, in the first century, the anchor was the symbol of hope. That's why for you ladies who wear little charm bracelets, you'll see faith, hope, and love. And you notice faith was a little cross, and hope was a little anchor, and love was a little heart. But an anchor is a symbol of hope. Take a look at that thing. You see the guy working on it down at the bottom down there? Take a look at that thing. Can you tell me what the characteristic of an anchor is? It's big and heavy. And I have this very confident expectation based upon the fact that it's big and heavy and designed to grapple onto things, that when I drop anchor, it's going to stay put. I don't have to want it to stay put. Its characteristic is to stay put. That's what it's designed to do. That's its characteristic. And that is why the anchor is a symbol of hope, because its characteristic is to stay where it's going to be there. You know it's going to happen. You never have to think, well, do you think it's going to stay there? It's going to stay there. In fact, in the first century, the anchor was the symbol for Christianity. Crosses didn't really become popular until the 300s. So you can go around to Christian graves back in the first century, and you won't find a cross on them. You'll find an anchor. It was the predominant symbol of Christianity all throughout the first century. The anchor was a symbol of hope, and it echoed these words from Hebrews, which said, we have this hope, a sure and steadfast anchor of the soul, a hope that enters the inner shrine behind the curtain. And what is this hope? Well, the writer of Hebrews pointed out that God had made certain promises to us. And since God has never reneged on a promise, that is the hope. See, it's a confident expectation that God will do exactly what he says he will do because of his character, that he's never reneged on a promise, and that hope becomes like an anchor, and it anchors our soul. We're not going to have to drift. We don't have to be afraid of drifting off or being overtaken by a storm because we've been anchored in the hope which is God. And so I wanted to talk about that hope a little bit. Oh, by the way, here's another little interesting thing. A lot of scholars, especially the linguists, they think that the anchor may have been a symbol of hope because there was a little Greek pun in there, a little Greek play on words. The word ankara, which is anchor, resembles the word encurio, which is in the Lord. So the two sort of sounded the same. It was a little Greek pun. And so everybody's like, yeah, that's what we'll do. We'll do an anchor. That'll make a lot of sense. And it'll be kind of like a little joke, a little inside joke that everybody knows. Of course, we switched from Greek to Latin, and all of a sudden we went from anchors to crosses. And they think that might be the reason why, because we switched over to Latin. Hope is a confident expectation based upon the character of a person or thing. Can I trust that when I drop anchor, it's going to stay there? Because that's its characteristic. So where do we as Christians get our hope? Where is our hope as Christians? Well, Advent is a season of anticipation and hope because we have a confident expectation of Jesus' help and his return because of his character. A confident expectation of his help and his return because of his character. Think about the character of Jesus. The whole Bible points to the character of Jesus. Can we expect his help? Can we expect him to keep his promise? Well, let's take a look at it. Starting in the Old Testament, how about Abraham? Abraham was promised a child and that he would become a great nation. Did God fulfill it or not? And the answer is he did. Think about Joseph. Joseph was given a dream that one day he would be a ruler over many things and his own brothers would bow down to him. He ended up getting sold off to slavery, but did God fulfill the promise or not? And the answer is yes, he did. Think about the story of Job. Job had everything taken from him, and yet he trusted in the Lord. He believed in the Lord. He had hope, which is the only thing that kept him going after his entire life had been destroyed. And what happens at the end of Job? Everything is returned to him and increased, because that is the character of God. Think about Israel's return from exile. Israel, the children of Israel, the promised nation, carried off into slavery. And yet God, through the prophets, promised to them over and over again, I will bring you back and I will make you a nation. Did he keep his promise? They're on the map since 1948. What about the coming of the Messiah? He promised that one day the Messiah would come, and they waited, and they waited, and they waited, and they waited in anticipation. And did the Messiah come? Yeah. That's what we celebrate at Christmas time, the coming of the Messiah, that Jesus is here. So we can look at God's character and we can say, everything he promises, he fulfills. Everything he promises, he fulfills. So if he makes me a promise, I have confident expectation. I have hope. Talking about the coming of the Messiah. In Luke chapter 2, talking about the birth of Christ. When Christ was born, heavenly angels appeared and began to proclaim, "Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace to men on whom his favor rests." This is a great characteristic of God, that God is for us and not against us. I know you can go to other churches and they'll tell you how much God is against you and how much he hates everything you do. But God is for us. He's not against us. When the Messiah was born into this world, that's what he was telling us. I am for you, not against you. Can we have hope in a God who is for us and not against us? What if we had a God who was against us? Where would our hope be? We'd have to just want. We would have no hope. We'd have to say, well, hopefully I didn't tick him off today since he's so against me. But we have a God who is for us, who's on our side. What a great characteristic of that. That is something you can have confident expectation in. Again, continuing on the story in Luke chapter 4, talks about Jesus. He said he went to Nazareth, where he had been brought up. And on the Sabbath day, he went to the synagogue, as was his custom. And he stood up to read, and the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was handed to him. And unrolling it, he found the place where it's written, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to preach the good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to release the oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." And then he rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. And the eyes of everyone in the synagogue were fastened on him, and he began by saying to them, "Today, this scripture is fulfilled within your hearing." Centuries before, through the prophet Isaiah, God had promised the Messiah is coming. And when he comes, this is what he's going to do. He's going to free the oppressed. He's going to heal the sick. He's going to proclaim the Lord's good favor, that I'm on your side. And when Jesus showed up, he said, "Here I am, promise fulfilled." You want to know my Father's character? He's someone who keeps his promises. How do you know? Here I am. Can we have hope? We can have a confident expectation within the character of God, because everything he's promised, he's fulfilled. And he is a God who is on our side, not against us. Carrying on in Luke chapter 7, John's disciples, this is John the Baptist, told him about all these things. Calling two of them, John sent them to the Lord to ask, "Are you the one who has come, or should we expect someone else?" John the Baptist stops and goes, "Are you really the Messiah? Has the promise been kept?" And at that very time, Jesus cured many who had diseases, sicknesses, and evil spirits, and gave sight to many who were blind. So he replied to the messengers, "Go back and report to John what you have seen and heard. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cured, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is preached to the poor." Because every one of those things is what God promised would happen when the Messiah showed up. John wanted to know if the Messiah was there. He said, "Tell him what you see." That every one of God's promises is being fulfilled right in front of your eyes. Every last one of them. Can we have confident expectation in a God who keeps every promise and is on our side? I think we can. God never promised us a trouble-free life. He did promise to be there with us in the dark times, in the stormy seas, to give us hope in spite of fear. Thinking about that stormy sea analogy, when there's a huge storm at sea, what do? They drop anchor to secure themselves. We can have our souls secured through the hope that we have in God, this confident expectation that we have in God. No matter how bad it gets, we can be confident that God is on our side and that he will get us through it. He won't just make it magically go away, but he will be with us and get us through it. That's why David says in Psalms, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death." He didn't say, yea, though I walk around it, or yea, though, God made it disappear. He says, when I walk through it, you're going to be there with me. We have a God who promises to always be with us in all the troubles. Has God ever reneged on a promise? Not a one. Time and time again, he makes a promise, he fulfills a promise. So we can confidently expect him to fulfill every promise that he has to us. Are you having troubles? He'll be there with you. He'll be there with you. You may not sense it. You may not feel it. Maybe in all the chaos you're going, I just don't, but he's there. Later, when it's over, you'll look back and you go, oh yeah, he was there. I know it. There is only one secure foundation, a genuine, deep relationship with Jesus Christ, which will carry you through any and all turmoil. No matter what storms are raging all around, you'll stand firm if you stand on his love. How about that one? God says he loves us. God says he loves us. Not only does he fulfill every promise he's ever made, not only is he for us and not against us, but he says that he loves us. Now, a lot of us have been in relationships, and maybe somebody said they loved you, and guess what you found out? You can't put your hope in that. Human beings will always disappoint you. Human beings are frail. You can't put your trust in them. You can't put your hope in them. Put your hope in our government, it's going to fail you. It's just made up of human beings. Put your hope in a church, it's just made up of human beings. It's going to fail you too. Put your hope in a pastor or an elder, they're going to fail you. They're just human beings. There's only one thing that we can surely have hope in, and that's Jesus Christ. Because he's the only one who keeps every promise. He's the only one who never fails. Look at some of the older saints in the building today, and if you don't believe that, just sit down and say, is that true? And they'll tell you about it. They'll tell you about how Jesus has led them through every difficulty of their lives to where they are now. Advent indeed is a season of hope. What do we have the hope of? Well, we have the hope that God's going to fulfill his promises. Jesus said, I'm going away for a while, and I will come back. And this is the expectation that we have in our heart, that any day it could happen. He could be back to set all things right. What do we have hope in? We have hope that he is for us and not against us. I know there are people in this room who probably at one time or another says, I think God is really out to get me. But he's not. He's on your side. And you can face the world knowing that God is for you. What do we have hope in? That he loves us. That he loves us. He says he loves us, and he's not like a human being. If he says it, he means it. That he truly does love us. Advent is a season of hope. We're going to move into a time of communion.